trying to use natural light and do a new filming location, but here we go. We'll see if that works because it's weird lighting because of natural light. So, hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here today, my name is Odds, and we are going to be talking about 10 things I learned living in New York. So, this was kind of the brainchild of a video suggestion, which was to do city reviews. And I thought it would be nice to do ones about cities that I've lived in, so like 10 things that I've learned. So going to go over a lot of stuff in this video, a lot of stuff that's probably known in New York, but that you'll find out. And if you're new here today, I would love for you to subscribe. I do 2 videos a week, beauty, vlogs, superhero content, films, TV shows. There's something in this for everyone. And if you see a tail walking around, there's a cat. My cat, Casey, is obsessed with the fact that I'm on the floor right now. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I want to mention that I learned about living in New York is, which is a thing that might be applicable to a lot of different places, but you cannot be messy. So get used to, I would say, get used to rats, mice, and cockroaches real quick. I'm not saying that they're a good thing and that you should just accept that they're there, but with mice, you kind of do have to accept that they're there. They might come into your home, and they're not, I mean, mice in themselves are very cute, but I don't want them in my home as vermin. So there's lots of things you can do to prevent mice or to kind of counteract mice. You can always get a cat. I will warn you that they're not always active in fighting off the mice. They might just play with them. From experience here. You can always get traps. I always recommend the ones where you don't have to see anything. So they're like a white trap. They're enclosed, and always trap it with peanut butter. They love peanut butter, so just trap it with peanut butter. But probably the best thing that you can do is not be messy. So don't leave dishes out all the time. It's going to attract mice, cockroaches, lots of stuff. You cannot leave dishes out. Don't have your windows open if you can avoid it, or have screens in your windows. That would be the most beneficial. And ultimately, I'd say just don't be messy. Clean your floors, vacuum, mop, do whatever, wipe down counters all the time after you're done eating. That is what I would advise. I've dealt with lots of mice. I've dealt with a rat before. That was something. But definitely don't put like food waste on the floor. If you have a trash bin, make sure it closes. And same thing with recycling. You're going to want to make sure that closes. The second thing I learned is that you can actually avoid crowds in New York City. So it's very stereotypical that New York City is very crowded. Now, that's because a lot of people live there, a lot of people come to visit there, but you can avoid crowds. There are a few ways to do so. Now, I would suggest living in an area that's not populated, which most likely, based on your budget, you probably won't live in a very populated, not a very populated, but a very busy area. So when I lived in New York for 3 years, I lived in Harlem the entire time, West Harlem specifically. It was not a very overly busy area. There were a lot of people that lived there, but there weren't as many like restaurants and shops directly around my apartment. I had to walk a few blocks to get there. So I would definitely recommend living in a less busy area. Other less busy areas would be, but more expensive, would be the Upper East Side. A lot less busy. I noticed walking around there all the time, I would never really run into crowds on the Upper East Side. But you definitely want to avoid the Upper West Side, Greenwich Village, Soho, those areas that are more desirable. Although Upper East Side falls into that, but the more desirable areas are going to be more crowded. Even like East Harlem and kind of central Midtown Harlem. Central Harlem is what you would refer to that as, or just Harlem in general, are a little bit more busy. I didn't mention this. There's a few things I'm remembering that I didn't mention this. So there's going to be more than 10. But the other tip I would have to avoid crowds is avoid using the subway at rush hours. So if you can avoid getting on the subway from 7 to 9 a.m. and then from like 5 to 6:30, then you should be good. And I know if you're working, then you really can't avoid those times, but if you're looking for a way to avoid the crowds, that would be it. Another thing I learned living in New York is you will have roommates, so be careful about how you go about picking them. Now, I think dream situation, you would move with some friends, you know some people that live there already. Maybe not necessarily your best friend. You might want to live with people that you know, but aren't going to necessarily have friendships ruined over situations with living together. So you might want to know if you're going to move with a best friend, if you want to know their living style beforehand. Very important. And that goes with anybody you choose to live with. You have to have similar living styles. So if you're, say, not as cleanly and you move with a roommate who's really cleanly, that's going to butt heads. So maybe view somebody who has the same style as you, but also, going back to the first tip, maybe you should be really cleanly because mice, cockroaches, and rats, we're worried about all 3 of those. So maybe you should be cleanly, but, just stuff in that same vein. My 4th point is going to be about traveling around. So obviously the New York City, you're not going to need to have a car, but I would advise that you should still have a license. Now, wait, stay with me. I know I have a lot of friends in New York City who do not have a license. They're from New York, they're born and raised, they don't have a license. That's fine. But if you want to be able to do anything, you might want to, if you don't have a license, you might want to have a friend who has one or who has a car. This is going to be really helpful if you're moving in the city because somebody's going to need to rent a U-Haul. Somebody's going to need to help you with driving things around. If you want to do day trips to the Catskills or to upstate New York, to Westchester, to the beach, you might want to have a car for this. It would be a lot easier. You, per se, not necessarily having a car, but a friend who has a car would be really helpful. Or that's where your license comes in handy. You can always rent a car depending on the age. There's lots of rental services in New York City for quick day trips, so definitely look into that. Again, with the rentals, usually you have to be 25, so that gets a little tricky, but I would still advise to have a license or to know somebody who has a car. Another tip I have is, things that I learned, you gotta get used to smells. New York is a smelly city. You'll smell lots of stuff. You'll smell lots of garbage, poop, sometimes pee, lots of marijuana smells. Whether you like that smell or not, I'm just saying you will smell all of those things in New York City. Engine fuel, the snow, just different stuff. And different food and all that stuff. So New York is a very overwhelming city of smells. So if you have a sensitive nose, maybe living in New York City is not for you. But I don't think you're going to be able to avoid those smells. They're everywhere, even in the cleanest parts of the city. You're going to smell garbage and you're going to smell pee, like in every single aspect of the city. So sorry to break it to you. If you want a nice smell in New York City, go to Central Park, go to one of the parks, and you'll probably smell something a little bit nicer. Another thing I learned, I'm going to skip this one, but another thing I learned, and this is good for like making friends, people do not leave their boroughs. So if you don't live in Manhattan, or if you have a friend who lives, maybe in the Bronx, they'll come visit you if you live in Manhattan, but if your friend lives in Queens or your friend lives in Brooklyn, they're not going to come see you. Like, a lot of the time, even if Brooklyn and Queens is a quick subway ride away from Manhattan, a lot of people will not leave their boroughs. They would rather stay in their boroughs and do their own thing. I never understood this when I lived in New York. I had a lot of friends who went to school in Manhattan every single day, and yet still would not want to come to a party I had at my apartment in Harlem. Now, I understand subways stop running at certain hours, so that can definitely be a factor, but even during the day, there was still problems with that. But that is something to keep in mind, especially the folks from Brooklyn and Queens will not leave their boroughs, and they definitely will not travel between Brooklyn and Queens. That is like an absolute not gonna happen situation. You, like every other place I would say, but especially in New York City, study up on your neighborhoods. Now, New York has like this exorbitantly high crime rate, and there's crazy stuff that happens in New York City, like crazy violent stuff that happens, you know, stabbings, people being beaten with a baseball bat. That actually happened the week before I moved. Somebody got beat with a baseball bat. Just look at the neighborhoods. Now, things can happen in any neighborhood, but you want to study the neighborhoods because certain really nice neighborhoods can back into certain really not great neighborhoods. And you don't want to be caught in the wrong place, the wrong time, especially after dark. So keep account of that and be sure that you feel safe in the area that you do choose to live and the places that you choose to go. Another thing I learned is you're going to have to get used to seeing interesting people. Now, there are lots of different people that live in New York City, and some of them are going to be a lot different, especially if you're coming from a small town. I came from a relatively smaller city in Central Florida, going to a big city, the biggest city, New York City. You're going to see some interesting people on the subway, when you're grocery shopping, who will just come up and talk to you on the street. You're going to see some interesting people. So a thing to note is that they're human beings just like you are. So maybe don't judge them as much as you can try not to. But yeah, you're going to see weird stuff in New York. It's natural. I've seen so much weird stuff. I've had so many interesting people come up to me, especially when I used to work at Whole Foods. Whole Foods has a very interesting clientele, so definitely just try to keep an open mind. And again, if you don't feel safe, just leave. If you're in a good thing about New York and it being so crowded is that if you're in a public place and some person comes up to you and makes you feel unsafe, you can leave and maybe alert somebody or do something else. Even if you're out traveling by yourself, just go away, and then you won't have to deal with them. Second to last tip I have, or things that I learned, is to avoid walk-ups. Now, the thing about elevator buildings is that elevators break, so you will probably have to take the stairs at some point, but this is not to diss on my friend who lives in a 5-story walk-up now, but you're going to want to keep that in mind, because if you have to walk up 5 flights of stairs every single day to get home after a long day of traveling and work, because your commute's probably taking you 2 hours there and back, knowing how the subway system runs during rush hour, maybe you don't want to do that. But also moving. It's not going to be very easy to move into an apartment when you have 5 stories to walk up and 5 stories to walk down. So it's going to be a nightmare when you move in, and it's going to be a nightmare when you move out. Believe me, I have taken a couch down 4 flights of stairs. It was a nightmare. It was like that episode of Friends where Ross is yelling pivot. I swear to God, it is the same situation. And for me, considered I couldn't because I have a tumor in my knee, so I could not be going up 5 flights of stairs. Or anybody who's not in tip-top physical condition. The last thing I learned about living in New York City is that you need to learn local lingo. I was so confused when I heard the word bodega for the first time when somebody ordered a plain pizza. I did not know what any of that meant. So you're gonna want to know the local lingo. A bodega is a deli. Same thing, delis are very common in New York City, not in anywhere else I've ever been to. Basically like a convenience store, gas station with a like sandwich making shop in it, but there's no gas. So it's a convenience store that makes sandwiches in the middle of the city, and there's like one on every single corner. Don't understand it, don't quite get it, but love it at the same time. You're gonna want to find the best one, shop around, don't go to places with lower than an A food grade. There are lots of places, and you can afford to not go to somewhere, even with a B food grade, you can afford to go to somewhere with an A food grade. So that's what I have. There's lots of other tips I have for living in New York. I'm not going to go over like basic ones, like obviously New York is expensive. There's stereotypes of the people that live there. I always had a great experience, other than the interesting friends I made along the way. Always had a great experience with the locals that live there. So yeah, those are kind of my tips. These are more for like living in New York City. If you're interested in like visiting New York City, I could definitely do a video on that. So let me know if you're interested down below. I could definitely talk about highlights of the city that I think you should go to, things that you should avoid, how you can interact with locals. So definitely let me know if you're interested in that. But that is the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you on Friday with a new video.